And point number 7 says the 7 spirits are the image and likeness of the Father. The 7 spirits are the image and likeness of the Father. Our texts for this point are Revelation 1:4, Revelation 5:6, Revelation 4:10, 1 Corinthians 2:12, Revelation 2:7 and 1, Revelation 2:17 and 12. All right. So, as the point says, the 7 spirits are the image and likeness of the Father. So we will go to our first text there, Revelation 1 verse 4. And we are using for this study the literal standard version. This is a version that I recently came in possession of, and I really like it, though it's not perfect. But you know my rant on the King James Version already, okay? If you have been following me for a while. However, Revelation chapter 1 verse 4 says, John, to the 7 assemblies that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is, and who was, and who is coming, and from the 7 spirits that are before his throne, okay? The 7 spirits that are before his throne. What are these 7 spirits? Let's go for a little more detail. Revelation 5 verse 6. Revelation 5 verse 6. We want to see a little more detail. The Bible always interprets itself. Revelation 5:6. John again in his vision, and I saw and behold in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders a lamb standing as having been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God. Okay? So these 7 spirits are the 7 spirits of God. Okay? The 7 spirits of God. So we know from our previous study on the Father revealed in a short time, we saw that the one who sits on the throne is the Father, right? He's the Almighty One. He's the Creator. He's the source, right? And so these 7 spirits come from him or proceed from him, all right? Now the number 7 speaks of, as we said, not quantity, because remember in the book of Revelation, we are already counseled, we are already warned or forewarned that it is given in signs and symbols. Revelation 1 verse 1 tells us that the vision was signified or signified. Okay? So most likely the numbers are also signs. They're symbolic. So the number 7 is not really talking about the quantity, but it's more likely talking about the quality, right? And the number 7 means complete or full or last or of a process, okay? So in this case, it would be fullness. So it's the fullness of the Father's Spirit, all right? It's the fullness of the Father's Spirit. And these 7 spirits are before his throne, in the presence of his throne, as Revelation 1 verse 4 says. If we go back there to look at what we just read, Revelation 1:4, it says these spirits are before his throne. The word actually there, which is rendered as before, is enopion. Greek word enopion, which means in the face of or in the presence of. And the throne there, again, remember, we are not looking at literal things. We are not looking at a photograph, but we are looking at symbolic things that symbolize heavenly realities, right? So the throne there is speaking of God's role as a judge, as a ruler, as a king over his creation, right? And so these spirits are coming from him in that role or that office or that position, right? Now, the 7 spirits come from the one seated on the throne. Revelation 4:10. Let's look at that also. You see, this is how we build our understanding, by looking for these little details which are given. It's not given all at once. You find them here and there, and then you have to take them like pieces of a puzzle pieces, and then you fit them together, and then you get a picture. All right, so it says there, the 24 elders will fall down before the one sitting on the throne, and worship the living one, the one living through the ages of the ages, and they will cast their garlands before the throne, right? So the one sitting on the throne is the one who lives or is living through the ages of ages, right? In the King James, this would be saying the one who lives forever and ever, right? And it says, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive the glory, the honor, the power, because you created all things, right? So it's the seven spirits are the spirit of the Creator. It's the spirit of the Lord and God. It's the spirit of the one who is living through the ages of ages, or the one who lives forever, right? These are his spirits, or spirit as you may say, because spirit doesn't really have a multiplicity, but it's one spirit, right? But as he said, this number 7 there more likely denotes quality than quantity. All right, now, so this is very interesting, because many of us came up with a traditional teaching about the Trinity and the Godhead and so on. But this is the revelation we are looking at. So this is the revealing of. Okay, this is the revealing of. Okay, so the seven spirits are all of the Father's spirit that can be inherited or communicated. Okay, these are the communicable aspect of God. Okay. In other words, there are certain aspects of God that can be communicated or passed on or inherited, and some that are not communicable. For example, God as being the Almighty God, he cannot pass that on to anybody. Okay, but he can pass on his wisdom. He can pass on his understanding. He can pass on his insight. He can pass on even his spiritual strength and power, right? He can even pass on his authority, right? These are things that he can pass on. And so the seven spirits represent that. He can pass on his likeness, right? So, as I said, the seven spirits are all of the Father's. Number 7 represents all, full, are all of the Father's spirit that can be inherited or communicated. It is his, as it were, spiritual DNA. All right? It is his spiritual DNA. So let's go back to Revelation 5 verse 6 and let's see something here, all right? Let's see an example of that. Revelation 5 verse 6. Let's go back. I'll go forward, one chapter here. We're going to read back the same verse we just read here, talking about the Lamb. And I saw and behold in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, a Lamb standing as having been slain. Okay, just to point out something here, which I will elaborate a bit more on in the next video, which we're going to talk about the Lamb. But here, the Lamb is standing, yet it had been slain. It's a contradiction seeming, right? Because if something is slain, it would not be standing. Right? If something is slain, meaning it is dead or having been killed, then it would most likely be lying down in a horizontal position, right? But here this Lamb is standing, okay? But it had been slain. In other words, it's saying that Christ had been dead, but now he lives, right? Anyway, so this Lamb, which we know is Christ in his role as Son of Humanity, dying on the cross, So we're just going to plug that in. Jesus Christ standing as having been slain. And look what Christ had now. Christ having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God. So notice, Christ had the 7 spirits of God. He had the 7 spirits of his Father, right? That's why I can say that the 7 spirits are the communicable aspect of God's spirit. It is God's spiritual DNA. Okay? So Christ, as the Son of the Father, would have the DNA of his Father. The 7 horns, right? As we said, the number 7 represents fullness, and the word and the horns represent power or strength or ability, right? So he has all power, all strength, all ability. Okay? And this was communicated also to the disciples. You remember in Acts chapter 1 verse 8, Christ told them to wait in Jerusalem until they receive power when the Holy Spirit comes and descends on them, right? So that same power from the 7 horns aspect of the Spirit was given also to the disciples, right? And then the 7 eyes, 7 again mean fullness or all. Eyes representing sight, spiritual sight, wisdom, knowledge, understanding. That's what Christ had, okay? So Christ is, in other words, we might say he's omniscient, he's all wise, he's all knowing, he's all understanding. But that was also communicated to the disciples. You remember in John chapter 16 verse 13, he told them when the Comforter comes, he will lead them into all truth and they will able to see things to come. So there's the aspect of the 7 eyes being communicated to the disciples, right? So these 7 spirits, as I said, represents the communicable aspects of God, communicated, inherited by or passed on by heredity to his Son, Jesus, and inherited by mankind, the believers on earth, right? So they represent and signify the image and likeness of the Father. That's another way you can put it. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 2 verse 12, for example. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 12, all right? Look at this, all right? No, you never heard it like this anywhere. Look what Paul says. For I have, verse 12 we should be at. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 12, it says, and we, that is the early church, the Corinthian church, Paul speaking to the Corinthian church. So when he says we, in the first place he's talking about himself and the apostles. And then in the second application would be the Corinthian, right? He says, and we did not receive the spirit of the world. Okay? So here we have a spiritual DNA, a spiritual image and likeness of the world, right? He said, no, we did not receive that, but the spirit that is of God. So here we have the spirit of God, the 7 spirits of God, right? That's what they received. So Paul is saying that the spirit of God is the image and likeness. That's what they received from God. They did not receive the spirit of the world, which is the image and likeness of the world. They received the image and likeness of the Father, right? He says that we may know the things conferred by God on us. Now this word know, another way of saying know is to see, right? This is the 7 eyes. Because if I say to you, I see what you are saying, right? If I say I see what you're saying, I'm saying I understand what you are saying. Good. So when Paul says they have received the Spirit of the Father, that they may know or that they may see the things conferred by God on us. So the spiritual sight helps us to see the things of the Spirit, the things of God, right? The things of the Father, right? Because you have now received the image and the likeness of your Father, so you begin to see excuse me, you begin to see as your Father sees. All right. Oh man, this is really good news. Huh? This is good news, and a lot of folk would say, Revelation chapter 1. What kind of information? Where's the good news in Revelation chapter 1? But you see, in every chapter of the Bible, there is good news. If you really look for it, you'll find the treasure. Okay, so these 7 spirits, the spiritual DNA, the image and likeness of the Father, flows from his throne, from his authority and presence. Okay, and these 7 spirits now enable humanity to be in connection and in harmony with the Father, right? And thus to hear his voice, just like Paul just said there, to know the things that God is conferring upon them, right? So this is the one of the functions of the 7 spirits, right? That we may hear his voice. Look at Revelation chapter 2, verses 7 and verse 1. Okay, I'm reading it kind of backwards because I want to prove a point. Okay, Revelation chapter 2, verse 7, and then we can go back to verse 1. It says, he who is having an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says. Okay, he who is having an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says. Now, for you to hear the Spirit, you must have the Spirit. Because the Spirit is that which enables you to be in connection with and in harmony with God so that you can hear his Spirit. But so that you can hear his voice, rather. Because, look, let him hear what the Spirit says, right? Now, if we back up to verse 1 now, he was saying this thing to the Ephesian church, the Ephesian assembly. And look at verse 1. To the messenger of the Ephesian assembly write, these things says, so someone is speaking. Who is speaking? He who is holding the 7 stars in his right hand. Now, if you go back to Revelation 1:20, you will discover that this is Christ who had the 7 stars in his right hand. So Christ is speaking, right? But then in verse 7, it tells you, it is the Spirit that is speaking. Right? So Christ speaks through the Spirit or in the Spirit, and when those who have God's Spirit would hear, right? They would hear his voice. So the Spirit brings humanity into connection with the Father and his Son. Remember, the Son is the Word, the Logos, right? The Word of the Father. So the Spirit now brings mankind into connection because the Spirit is flowing from the presence of the Father, through the Son, because the Son is the channel, and to humanity, right? Bringing them into connection, into harmony. That's the oneness that Christ spoke about. Okay? Thus they can hear his voice. Look at another example. Same Revelation chapter 2. We're going down to verse 17 this time. It says, he who is having an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says. Again, Spirit speaking. Good. And if you jump back up now to verse 12, all right, verse 12, it says there, and to the messenger of the assembly in Pergamos write, these things says, so someone is speaking, he who is having the sharp two-edged sword. Again, if you're going back into Revelation chapter 1, you will see Christ presented there, standing among the 7 lampstands, and the 7 lampstands represent the 7 assemblies or the 7 churches, and he's depicted there as having a sharp two-edged sword coming out of his mouth. Again, all of this is signified, symbolic, right? But anyway, we know this is Christ speaking, but then in verse 17 it says it's the Spirit speaking. All right? So if you think about excuse me, if you think about a radio station, FM station, broadcasting 24/7. There are hundreds or thousands or even maybe tens of thousands of radio stations that are broadcasting at this very moment. But you can't hear them. We can't hear them. What do we need to hear them? We need a tuner, right? We need a tuner, and the tuner now tunes into the specific frequency of any one of those stations, right? And once it comes in harmony with the frequency of the broadcast station, then we can hear what is being broadcast from the station. But it doesn't mean at the time we hear what is being broadcast, it doesn't mean that the station had just began broadcasting at the time we heard it. No, that station was broadcasting all the time. But it's only when the tuner tunes in, then you can hear, right? Similarly, God is always speaking. The Father is always speaking. But first, we need the Spirit to tune in to what He's saying. And then also we need the Spirit to help us to understand what He is saying also, right? So that's one of the functions or the role of the Spirit. So in summary, the 7 spirits before the throne of the Father are the complete communicable Spirit of the Father. They help us, or they bring us into connection with Him so that we can hear His voice. They bring us into harmony with Him by communicating His image and His likeness to us, just like His Son had His image and His likeness.